Thank you very much, sir. Uh, I had one question, sir, from my side. Some news reports says that there is some criticism in Jinping within the Chinese Communist Party. How should we can understand this one?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat it?
Some news report says that there is some criticism of Jinping about the Chinese Communist Party within the Chinese Communist Party.
Yes. The unlike Soviet Union, where we have a monolithic Communist Party, in the case of China, the Communist Party has several factions. And although they deny the existence of factions within the Communist Party in China, at least four major factions are visible. One is the Xi Jinping faction. Xi Jinping is a princeling, meaning those Communist Party cadres, revolutionary leaders of 1940s, their sons and daughters, they have now been in power. For example, Xi Jinping's father was Xi Chungshun, and he was a revolutionary, and he was thrown out during the Cultural Revolution, and he was made a party secretary in Guangdong province next to Hong Kong. So Xi Chungshun's son, Xi Jinping, today is the general secretary. Likewise, there are thousands such princelings who are in power. Now, as you all know, the Communist Party, the most influential body in the Communist Party is the Politburo Standing Committee. There are 7 members. Xi Jinping has support of 5 members out of 7, including himself, of course. This include Xi Jinping himself. Then you have the other Politburo Standing Committee members. Now, only 2 members belong to the Communist Youth League, which is the other rival faction which came under influence in Hu Yaobang in 1970s. Hu Yaobang was a Communist Youth League leader. One of his successors was Hu Jintao, who became President General Secretary later on in the 2000s, early 2000s. So today there are 2 members of the Communist Youth League who have a different opinion than the princelings. So the tussle is between the Communist Youth League and the princelings, number 1. Number 2, Xi Jinping, within the princelings, he has another faction. It's called the New Zhejiang Army. It's not the army actually, but it is a group of people. So when Xi Jinping served in Zhejiang province, closer to Shanghai, he promoted several officials, and they all now became party secretaries in the provinces. Party secretaries are like our chief ministers in India. So they're very powerful. So Xi Jinping appointed his New Zhejiang Army faction people in all provinces, most provinces. So this is the tussle between the princelings, New Zhejiang Army, and the Communist Youth League. The third faction is the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. So unlike in India, the parliament is elected by the people and Rajya Sabha indirectly by the elected people. In the case of China, the National People's Congress, they have 10% reservation for the military. So some 200 members in the military, they are members of the parliament. They also have 100 members in the party congress. The 20th party congress is due next year. So these military also exercise power. So unlike in India, where the Indian armed forces abide by the Republic of India constitution, in the case of China, the PLA abides by the party constitution, not by the state constitution. So the army armed forces are a party armed forces in China. So this is a big faction. We do not know what happens, but Xi Jinping has removed several former officials. He arrested one Politburo Standing Committee member, Chow Yun-kang, who was in control of the police. He's something like our home minister. So he arrested Chow Yun-kang in some 4 or 5 years ago. This is the first time a standing committee member was arrested. In 1989, during Tiananmen Square incident, those people who were supporting the students, those leaders were put under house arrest, including Zhao Jiang, the premier. So there is a lot of criticism within the Communist Party on, number one, how Xi Jinping handled the COVID-19. Because what we hear is, yesterday the total figure that China released is 88,456 infections. While we have more than 10 million, the Chinese have suggested only 88,000, where the virus originated. And their white paper in June last year mentions they have been transparent and effective, swift, and so on. Nevertheless, there is a lot of criticism that they did not reveal the actual information about the COVID-19 spread in Wuhan and rest of China. Last 1 week, there is some disruption in Shijiazhuang, a city closer to Beijing, and some 22 million households have been shut down, locked down in that part of China. So China has not been transparent about its COVID-19 related issues. So as a result, there is a lot of criticism internally in China. Some party members like Ren Zhejiang, he was arrested. He was close to the vice president Wang Qishan, but he was arrested because he wrote an article called The Emperor's New Clothes. మనం చిన్నప్పుడు చదువుకున్నాం ఎంపరర్స్ న్యూ క్లోత్స్ అని అంటే అదొక కథ. So he wrote a parody by saying that the leader Xi Jinping is trying to wear new clothes when there is a problem at hand. The other criticism is that Xi Jinping is wasting national resources on the Belt and Road Initiative, that he is spending a lot of money and the money may not come back to the taxpayer in China. For instance, they have taken Hambantota for 99-year lease. Sri Lankans are not able to pay back that money. And so you never know, 99 years is too long a period. If they convert these into a base, that may be good for Chinese taxpayer, but may be bad for the Sri Lankans. Or maybe there is a revolt in Sri Lanka against these in future. 99 years is too long to predict the situation. So there is a criticism also that China is spending a lot of money in the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a waste. So there is a lot of criticism on Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping's sister, according to Bloomberg News Agency, she was involved in corruption. Although Xi Jinping himself launched an anti-corruption drive, but Bloomberg newspaper accused with evidence that some $800 million were acquired by his sister. So we do not know the veracity of this, but there is no explanation from China on that. There is also the other criticism that he attacked the other factional leaders in terms of anti-corruption rather than his own faction people. So there is a growing criticism. We do not know how this will pan out in the next party Congress, but there is a growing criticism in China. But as you know, China follows Leninist democratic centralism, more centralism than democratic, of course. So which basically means that there is, if you criticize the leader, then you had it. So many people have been put in jail in the name of corruption or in the name of other things, including the nearly 50 billion worth Jack Ma of the Alipay, Alibaba, or other groups. He was criticized, and for nearly 3 months, he was out of the picture. So in China, it is difficult to survive if you criticize the leader.
Thank you, sir. Next is Mr. Teju.
Hello,
Hello.
sir. Namaskaram. My name is Tejaswini. I'm a student of International Affairs at the New School in New York. I have two questions. First is, could you speak about the future of multilateral and bilateral agreements between India and China within the G77 inside the United Nations? Secondly, there was a special report released about China not taking a stance early on with respect to the pandemic. So India and South Africa had started this vaccine drive to make sure that the patents are, there is a time bound for patents within the vaccine. What was China's stance on it, and what do you think the future of such patents and intellectual property right issues would be? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. The first one, in terms of the multilateral institutions, India and China almost double up in terms of their membership in many multilateral institutions, like the non-aligned movement, although China is not a member of the non-aligned movement. Ironically, India admitted China in the Bandung Conference in the Afro-Asian Unity in 1955, which was revived in 2005 in terms of the multilateral grouping. When we say about G77, the issues related to WTO, issues related to IPR protection, issues related to climate change, issues related to subsidies in the WTO or in other, these are the major areas. And initially, there is a common understanding between China and India in these. India is a founding member of the GATT, which became the WTO, but China joined only in 2000, December, 2001 December. So China is a recent entrant, but China used the WTO substantially to become the largest exporting country. In 2000, before China joined the WTO, it had just about $200 billion of trade. Now, in 2020, China's trade constituted nearly $5 to $6 trillion. So WTO provided a huge opportunity for China to expand, and today it claims to be the leader of globalization. Xi Jinping addressed the Davos summit meeting in which he mentioned about China taking the lead in the globalization process. So today, China is at the forefront in the globalization in terms of tariff reductions, free trade agreements, and so on, because it is confident of pushing through its manufacturing sector. On the other hand, many G77 countries are looking at basically north-south problems. North-south problems are in terms of the FDI flows, in terms of the skewed nature of the market on tariffs, on a host of other things, also on climate change. In climate change, the basic countries, Brazil, South Africa, India, and China, came together on what they mentioned as equal but differentiated responsibilities. Equal but differentiated responsibility, meaning every country in the world, the 200 odd countries, have an equal responsibility to roll back emissions, but differentiated responsibilities. That is, the developed countries should bear more responsibility than the developing countries, because developing countries just began the manufacturing sector. While developed countries since industrial revolution have been able to produce so much of material capability, but also emissions. So the developing countries suggested to a differentiated responsibility. Now, that is where the commonality ends between China and India in the G77. Now, subsidies wise, China lifted many subsidies in the agriculture sector, in other sectors, because it wanted to be the leader of globalization. But in the case of India, in the case of G77, they're not willing to remove these subsidies, because removal of subsidies means in Andhra Pradesh, in Telangana, in Maharashtra, we will have suicide deaths by the farmers because of the nature of commercialization and the nature of the, in any case, if you look at the subsidies, European countries and other developed countries pay more subsidies to their animals than even our human beings in India or in other countries in the G77. On this issue, China has been silent because it wanted to use these issues in order to say it is a good boy in the WTO dispute mechanism. So in G77, it had a different view, also on the IPR protection on others. On the second aspect, in terms of the vaccine, now there are 7 or 8 major initiatives, some 4 in Europe, 2 in US, 2 in Russia, and 2 in China. So what the Serum Institute and Bharat, the vaccine developer in India, what India did was to collaborate with some of the credible pharmaceutical R&D institutions. And IPR wise, there is no major issue between the Indian pharma and the European pharma. Indian side since the 1950s have generated a lot of generic drugs because we had post-independence, we wanted to control diseases like leprosy, TB, and other diseases. So we had the generic drugs at a cheaper cost. And then we became the global hub for the pharmaceuticals. There are no issues about the IPR or on other aspects because we produced on a mass scale and brought down the prices. So we today are exporting these vaccines to about 92 countries, some on free and some at very low cost, as has been mentioned by the Serum Institute at 250 rupees a swab. So in other words, South Africa itself is procuring vaccine from India, while in the case of China, it wants to sell and it wants to also escape the responsibility on COVID-19. We all know the COVID-19 originated from Wuhan, yet China did not take responsibility. China did not apologize to the global community. China did not compensate. The COVID-19 did not originate in India. Still, India provided at a free of cost these vaccines to many countries. On the other hand, China is selling. Even the Chinese vaccine, it's only 50% effective. The Sinovac, as the Brazilians found. So there are problems with this vaccine aspect.
Good evening, sir. As far as China is considered, it is known a rogue nation because it never believed in any talks or for that reason any international commitments. If you look even from 1899, the Macartney-Macdonald line, which is supposed to have a clear border on the Western Front as far as India and China are concerned, and subsequently in 1914 Simla Accord, even then none of these agreements were signed. And even after independence, our military leaders have been discussing various continuous talks as far as fixing the border is concerned. Though they come to the meeting, at no stage they were concluded. Even today happens to be the 9th round of talks between the military level leaders. And do you expect any positive result because of this kind of military level discussions are going to emerge? Number one. Number two, with the Belt and Road Initiative, with the expansion of the ports in Sri Lanka as well as Gadar port in Pakistan, do you think there is going to be a military threat of this Belt and Road Initiative has another mask of militarily expanding, including, you know, that some of the African countries are already in the debt trap and they also became the military bases of China. Probably to counter this Belt and Road Initiative, India need to have a strategic long-term planning vis-a-vis China as far as their expansionist tendencies are concerned. Because in the last so many years, they have grabbed Mongolia, they have taken over Xinjiang, they have grabbed again Tibet, and so on. They don't have any good neighborly relations with any of the countries which are surrounding or including literal states like Vietnam and all that. So as a consequence of this, India need to, instead of having this kind of bilateral relationships which are carrying on for ages, need to have a good strategic relationship, planning, not relationship. As far as China policy is concerned, I don't think any such initiative is there on Indian government rather than attending to day-to-day problems rather than next 30 to 40 years. Like China has its plans for 2050, whereas in our country, both are either on military side or as on the security side, we do not have any such initiatives.
Thank you very much for those questions. First, on the territorial dispute, it is right to say that there has not been any agreement so far. British India tried to fix the borders by various surveys and, for instance, as you mentioned, the McCartney line, Ardagh-Johnson line, and there are 4 more which have been considered at one point or the other. The Shimla Conference in 1914 It had two issues. One is the McMahon line in the eastern sector, which we have proposed to the Chinese side, but not in the western sector. There is also a McMahon line for the western sector. The second issue is dividing Tibet into inner Tibet and outer Tibet, like Inner Mongolia, which was occupied by the Chinese, and Outer Mongolia, which was under the Soviet leadership. So there was a proposal for dividing Tibet into Inner Tibet and Outer Tibet on the model of Mongolia. But that could not take place because both the Tibetan representative Longchen Shatra and the Chinese representative Chen Yifan refused to accept the division. But on the other hand, Chen Yifan initialed the McMahon line map. In diplomacy, when you initial something, it means that in principle you agree to the proposal, but you will come back to have a final say, a final agreement through a treaty. So that did not happen because of various other considerations. So China technically has a problem with the McMahon line because it had initialed the document in 1914. Zhou Enlai, when he came to Delhi in 1960, he suggested that he has no basic problem with the McMahon line, but he wanted us to change the nomenclature to that of People's Line rather than McMahon Line. And these were recorded in the conversations with Gobind Ballabh Pant, with Natwar Singh, who was accompanying Zhou Enlai, or other leaders. So there is the McMahon line, which is almost agreed. Of course, they made a suggestion that India first should recognize Aksai Chin as part of China, provided the Indians, the Chinese side will also recognize south of McMahon line as part of India. Now, the whole issue could not be settled for various reasons. And then we had the 1962 border clashes. Now, what do we do with the border? We signed several agreements and we also had several talks. Last 36 years, we have been discussing the border dispute between China and India. So it's a long time. It's like the 100-year war between France and UK. And UK and France, they were depleted in the First World War, Second World War. Is something like that between India and China with these 36 years of discussions. Except that there is peace and tranquility, which is now broken in Galwan. So what do we do about this? It appears China decided to occupy all areas that it thinks it is theirs. So we have a new situation now, which means if we do not follow up on this, China may build like they built in Sari-Chu River Valley, in Upper Subansiri River. They are likely to bridge construction infrastructure projects in areas which they think is their sovereign territory. So this is the new complexity that we are grappled with. Many of our areas are not accessible because we do not even have roads to go up to the line of actual control. So in this process, the Chinese have nibbled away some territories. So this is a new concern, which means we have to first do the road construction, reach the border areas, and also do the infrastructure projects like houses and so on. So it's a long process. We have to take a call on these. So that is first issue. The second is in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative militarization. Now, China has spent $120 billion so far in the Belt and Road Initiative projects out of a promised $1 trillion. So 1/10 they spent, and today they now want to grab all those that they built because many of these areas are in poorer countries. For example, Mombasa port was constructed in Kenya. Kenya was not able to pay back. So China today wants to take over as a government entity. It wants to take over the port and run it. Like they took over Hambantota, they also want to take over the Mombasa port in Africa. Likewise, several railroads. Now, many of these railroads, for example, they are building hydroelectricity projects in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So many of these have also terrorists. So now China is putting up security guards to protect. So first China invested, second China moved its boots on the ground. China today is sending security guards in these areas. So it's a smart move because they say we invested, we want the returns, and the host country is not able to pay back. So they are taking over many of these, including Djibouti, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, many areas. They are not able to pay back. Nepal became more smarter under Prime Minister Oli, and China also threatened that many of the projects that they constructed in Nepal, they want these returns or some sovereign guarantees or restrictions on Tibetans living in Nepal. So China is putting a lot of conditions for the investments in the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is where the situation lies. What should India do? The third question that you raised. One of the problems that India currently has is India's focus is on economic growth rates at the moment. And in the last 1 year, we are also forced to look at COVID-19 disruptions to save our own lives. The government is trying to take some measures in this regard. So we are kind of slowed down in a way, which means that we are not fully prepared. Of course, we are fully prepared in terms of the military, but not in other related aspects. For instance, we have to build roads all across in the line of actual control, but we are not able to do it overnight. Laying down a road takes nearly 4 or 5 years. So that is the window that we needed.
We have done it in Daulat Beg airfield, right from Leh to Daulat Beg. We have built the roads already as far as the west is concerned. Probably our weak area is going to be Arunachal. That is where we have to concentrate.
Yeah, the Daulat Beg Oldie, we have an advanced landing ground. They call this as ALGs, Advanced Landing Ground. Advanced landing ground means that there is a very bare necessity, bare minimum facilities. For example, the C-130J transports, they just land anywhere. Because Ladakh is a flat land, you can land anywhere. For instance, there is an advanced landing ground next to Tibet by name Phukche in Ladakh. So Avro aircraft, they just land on the land. There is no proper construction there, yet they just land anywhere they can. So we landed several transports, heavy transports as well, in these advanced landing ground. Because the India-China border areas are of high altitude, on an average about 3,000 meters, it is actually difficult for the tarmac to be constructed because there is very less landing zone in the high altitude regions. So this is a structural constraint we have. Of course, the Indian Air Force is confident, as the Indian Air Force chief yesterday mentioned, that we can also be aggressive.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Next is Arunodaya.
Good evening, sir.
Madam, will you please switch on the video?
Okay, sir.
Possible?
Yeah, I'll try.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's all right. Please go on. Straight to the question.
Sir, my question is, can we take advantage of the Tibet policy of Trump in any way? Because China has been meddling with J&K, Pakistan, Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan, everywhere. So can we stop it by taking any measures or meddling with them? Though Chinese embassy has already warned us not to meddle in their internal affairs. That is one question, sir. The second question is, there are a lot of rumors. I don't know whether they are rumors or not, but it is said that a lot of money is spent in India to support China, to be in favor of China in the media and in intelligentsia or the intellectuals. That is one question. And the third one is, there is also, people also say that the PLA is not as strong as it is projected, because every Chinese boy is supposed to serve the army and they are not that interested, including in Galwam. People are so restless to go back in such unfavorable, they are not liking to stay in unfavorable conditions. How far are these true? And the other is, can we do something, take advantage of the Tibet policy of Trump?
Thank you very much. That's some good questions there. The Tibet Policy Support Act mentions 3-4 things. One is the Chinese effort to appoint their own 15th Dalai Lama through a golden urn process by taking chits, by taking a lottery from that golden urn and appointing a Chinese-led Dalai Lama. Because in 2007, the Chinese government made this proposal, which the Tibetan side had rejected. Today, the Chinese have appointed their own Pancham Lama, who was not recognized by the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, who is living in Dharamshala. So there is a problem with the two Pancham Lamas. The Dalai Lama anointed Pancham Lama is in house arrest, while the Chinese appointed Pancham Lama is going around, including to Tibet and other places. His seat of religious seat is the Shigatse monastery. And so what it basically means is you will have 2 Dalai Lamas, 2 Pancham Lamas, and maybe 2 Karmapa Lamas. So this leads to a lot of confusion, and in this confusion, the Chinese will thrive. So as a result, of course, for a Tibetan, a common Tibetan, they know who their God is. You don't have to tell them who their God is. The Dalai Lama is the God. So normal Tibetans know who their God is. You don't have to appoint somebody. So essentially, then China's action proved to be escalatory, and that is where the American support became crucial. The Central Tibetan administration also approached the US administrations in order to wriggle out of this process of Chinese appointed Dalai Lama. So this is one. So if the Chinese go ahead with the appointment of the 15th Dalai Lama, then Americans will sanction those officials who are involved in this process. So this is sanctions would mean supposing if some officials in Beijing or other places appoint the Dalai Lama, then there will be sanctions on those people not to enter the US, not to give them visas and other things. So this is one measure. Second measure is the Americans stated that they will also have the water related issue to be looked at. The 1.8 billion people are dependent on the water flowing from Tibet, and so there is an effort on this. So TPSA, Indian government did not make any announcement so far on the TPSA, Tibet Policy Support Act. So there is an effort to look at this issue from the various other initiatives. At the moment, we didn't say anything about TPSA. That is partly because we are at the moment in the midst of the Ladakh event. And we are also, we signed the One China policy. Of course, we can tweak the One China policy because as Sushma Swaraj mentioned in May 2014, if we have agreed to One China policy, China also has to agree to One India policy. If it doesn't abide by the One India, we need not abide by the One China. But for this, we need also more strength. So that is where the discussions within the government or within the establishments, they are taking place. What are the costs, what are the benefits involved in insisting on removal of One China policy? Policies have to be taken by looking at what are the costs, what are the benefits in this process. We cannot simply take an emotional policy option. So that is where the discussions are continuing on the TPSA and broadly on Tibet. But there is also a problem with this. The problem is if the 15th, generally a Dalai Lama is appointed by the previous Dalai Lama. So the previous Dalai Lama, that is the current 14th Dalai Lama, he dreams about a boy or a girl to become his successor. Generally, this has to be among the Tibetan community. So the boy or a girl has to be a Tibetan. So it can be from anywhere. It can be from India, it can be from Tibet, it can be from US, it can be from any country. But the only condition is they ought to be Tibetans ethnically. So assuming the 14th Dalai Lama had chosen or will choose in future his successor, we need to be also cautious. Supposing if the next Dalai Lama comes from India-China border areas, like Tawang, because in 16th century, the Dalai Lama came from Tawang, and so today China is saying that Tawang should belong to that of China. Their argument is one of the Dalai Lamas came from Tawang monastery, and so since he belonged to Tibet and Tibet belongs to China, so Tawang should belong to China. That is the argument. So let us pray for instance, that the next Dalai Lama should not be from Guntur, because China will claim Guntur as part of China. Uh, the jokes apart,
Yes.
the situation will actually be problematic, because for the next 70, 80 years, we will have uncertainty. Generally, no state does want to have uncertainty, because uncertainty means we spend more on defense, less on the education, healthcare, or on others. So this is a guns and butter argument in social sciences. So these are all complicated, number one. Number two is China investing in India among the intellectuals, among the media. They do. I do not want to name this newspaper. We all know which one it is.
Yeah.
From South India, there is an English newspaper
Yes. We know.
whose editor was called by the Chinese and visited Tibet, and he wrote a two-page article on Tibet saying Tibet is highly modern and Tibet has high education, literary, health, and so on. But he didn't mention who among the Tibetans are healthy, Tibetans or Chinese. Because a lot of Chinese have migrated to Tibet. So he must have seen those Chinese and said Tibetans are very wealthy. But the Tibetans complain that their per capita income is $1,000 as compared to $9,000 in the rest of China. So there is a problem. So it may be true that China may be investing in India. I just mentioned about this newspaper from South
Yeah.
India. Maybe there are others, maybe there are more, or maybe other industry, those who benefit from China trade could also be speaking. But we should not take this as a conspiracy theory, because trade is someone benefits, someone loses, but overall there is the business community benefiting.
It's not the question of trade alone. Media is a public, what do you say, it molds the public opinion. So investing in media is something a conspiratorial.
For which there are laws, for which India can implement those laws
Okay.
and take precautionary measures in this regard. But generally, most countries do influence operations.
Yes.
They influence the public by various means. We also had media-to-media exchanges between India and China. So all these things could be possible. But Indian government can take precautions, can shut down all these if it has the will. The third question that was raised was on the PLA. PLA today has about 1.8 million soldiers.
So,
And generally the recruitment is with when they are 18 years old and above. China also has the one-child policy, so which means that most of the soldiers can be said to be one child, and generally one child is a pampered child. So there is always a problem about the one child, meaning if that person becomes the soldier and the soldier has some reverses, like in Galwan, because while 20 Indian soldiers killed, there is probably 5 times the Chinese number of casualties. So if there is a no, one child policy, one child person cannot sustain that kind of a no or that kind of a beating. So there is a problem with the PLA from a psychological, socio-psychological perspective. Secondly, Indian soldiers have gone through the rigmarole, and Indian soldiers operated in 18,000 feet altitude, and in Siachen Glacier as well since 1980s. So Indian soldiers are acclimatized for those minus 40 degrees, minus 50 degrees centigrade. In the case of China, they didn't have the high altitude acclimatization. So many soldiers were reported to be ill, taken ill during the recent Ladakh Aksai Chin mobilizations. So this is what we heard about in the press, in the Chinese press. So there are problems for the PLA. The other problem is as we are acclimatized to the high altitude, the Chinese are not. So we have the ability to defend the situation in Ladakh, while China is a bit far away from its towns and cities. So it becomes very hard on their part in terms of logistics. So those are the problems for the PLA. But of course, they have some advantages. China spends $250 billion on defense, while we spend $52 billion. So 5 times the Indian spending. So they can have, for instance, in this high altitude, the first thing is there is no oxygen. So they put up these oxygen kiosks where you can go into that, get the oxygen with those oxygen masks, like we saw those ventilators, right, in the COVID-19. So likewise, they get the oxygen cylinders from the rest of China to get acclimatized. So China spends more than India on defense. So that's an advantage China has in terms of new equipment, in terms of other. So there are advantages and disadvantages.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Next is Tejasvi. Sir, only 3 more are there. We'll go for this. Mr.
Namaskaram,
Tejasvi.
Srikanth. Sir, can I ask my question?
Please go ahead, sir. Straight away to the question.
Yeah, Namaskaram, Srikanth. From layman perspective, I have a very small question. So what are the possibilities of China ending the democracy? Sorry, China ending this CCP and democracy coming into China. Is there any possibility, like India or US, China also turning into democratic nation? What are the possibilities?
Yeah. The Chinese Communist Party has 89 million, that is 9 crore, something like 9 crore cadres. And it is the owner of a lot of property in China. It is the center of power in China. And they are learning from the Soviet experience, because the CPSU, Communist Party of Soviet Union, disintegrated in 1989 to 91, and then the Soviet Union disintegrated. That is, the Communist Party disintegrated, and then the state disintegrated, the Soviet Union disintegrated. So some have speculated that the Communist Party of China will disintegrate, leading to the People's Republic of China disintegrating. So what are the prospects of this? I think that this is a long-term prospect rather than a short to medium term. The reasons are as follows. The Communist Party is in every walk of life in China. In the 2000s, they admitted capitalists. Some 2 lakh capitalists were admitted in 2002. and then subsequently several other lakh, including Jack Ma, who is worth 30 to 40 billion dollars. He is a Communist Party member. Now imagine Mukesh Ambani or someone becoming a Communist Party member. So it is something like that. So most capitalists, all capitalists, I should say, in China are Communist Party members. Now, this is the confusion. How can a capitalist be a communist or a communist be a capitalist? But that is what the Chinese have now evolved. So there is a lot of confusion in that regard. Second event is that with the reform program, the per capita income of Chinese have gone up to nearly $9,000. So there is a middle class which has emerged. Middle class generally demands more rights. For instance, they will first say, we want property rights. We want protection. We want police protection. We want legal protection. We want court protection. We want society's protection. We want this constitution to be amended. All that has been done. Private property is instituted in the Constitution of China. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, also instituted in the Constitution of China. So, of course, implementation is problematic in many areas. Nevertheless, the most important thing is private property has been instituted in the Constitution. So, as a result, today there is a nearly 200 to 300 million middle class has emerged in China, who are also seeking more powers. So there is a possibility that they may demand democracy in future. They did demand democracy in 1989 Tiananmen Square. During that time, after killing several thousand students, peasants, and workers, the Communist Party said, don't speak about democracy, speak about economic development. We will provide you with economic development, but do not speak about democracy. So there was a deal in 1989 on economic prospects. But today, last year, China grew at 2.3%. So the promise that China's Communist Party mentioned of economic growth rates have also fallen from 10% in 2010 to 2.5% in 2020. So, which means that there is a discontent in China. So this is, the deal has been not kept for various reasons. So this is another reason where there could be. The third is China actually has village level elections. There are some 8 lakh villages in China. They have elections. I personally observed those elections, and it is generally free and fair. So a person, 2-3 persons contest. One person becomes the panchayat president. So he or she is elected to be the sarpanch of that village. But the catch is, Communist Party branch is located at the tehsil or mandal. They call a county. So Communist Party cell is not located in the village. It is located in the tehsil or mandal. So as a result, the Communist Party says you can have elections as long as you are not questioning the Communist Party. So they did not experiment with elections at the county level, that is at the mandal level. So this is how they are experimenting. So which means that they may progressively increase up to the county level, prefecture level, province level, center level in the future. But that is possible if the electorate says that only Communist Party members will be elected. So that is the deal that they are going to sell to the people, like they sold the deal in Tiananmen Square in 1989. So which means the Communist Party wants to be the leader, period. You can bring in any permutations or combinations, but finally the Communist Party leader has to be the leader. That is the deal. So can China become another Soviet Union? Possible? We do not know. At the moment, the Communist Party is experimenting with all these. But in general, wherever there is a middle class demands more powers. And it is not compatible with the Communist Party leadership. So if the middle class grows, there is a possibility for democracy expansion in China. We saw in the Jack Ma case, Jack Ma became more powerful. He started criticizing in October last year the Chinese banking system by saying that this banking system is very unfavorable. It is not giving loans to the private sector and so on. So he criticized, and then his listing in the Shanghai Stock Exchange has been cancelled. A $35 billion IPO has been cancelled. And he disappeared for 3 months, only to appear in a video conference. So which suggests that there is a problem with this approach of growing up a middle class. It's a double-edged sword. We have to see how it goes.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Next is Malik, Mr. Malik ji. Hello. Please straight away, please ask your question, sir.
Sir, thanks for the wonderful lecture. I have one question regarding the 100-year celebration of founding of the Communist Party. So how do you see the 100-year celebration giving the pressure for the Xi Jinping to perform with his BRI facing multiple economic problems and all those things? And will this 100 years 100 years centenary celebration pressures would impact the India-China military border class issue now?
Yeah, the Communist Party of China, like India, CPI, they were established by the Soviet Comintern in 1921. So they decided to have the bourgeois democratic revolutions, and so they established these communist parties across the globe. Today, the Communist Party of China wants to celebrate its first centennial of the party. So they have till July and beyond, probably they have several activities announced, and we will see these activities coming to the fore. Now, in terms of its impact on the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI has been put up in the party constitution in 2017. So which means they have gathered some consensus that this should be the project that China is going to undertake externally. So it is going to be implemented for the foreseeable future, and depending on the response from other countries. For instance, the party constitution had adopted so many things, including Mao Zedong thought, but they are not implementing Mao Zedong thought. So we have to see how it goes on in the future on the Belt and Road Initiative. With the COVID-19, there is contraction in general across the globe. So they will probably tweak at a lower level of continuing the Belt and Road Initiative. For instance, in the second summit meeting in 2019, there were some 80 countries participated. But last year, during the COVID-19, only 26 foreign ministers participated, and that too online meeting. So there is a scaling down of participation from 80, nearly 80 to about 26. So there is a reduction in the number of countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. So that is one possibly, which would depend on how COVID-19 evolves in the future. Also, China's finances in financing the BRI projects and the local response and the internal criticism within China on the BRI, that also needs to be taken into consideration. The other is how it will impact on the border situation. Now, if India takes the offensive, and if India kills several thousand Chinese troops, let us just assume, in a escalatory process, because we saw just now the Sari-Chu construction satellite photographs, and there are some 23 places where this could be replicated in the future across the line of actual control. So if China does that, and if India retaliates by bombing some of these, this is the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party. So reverses on the border with India would be problematic for the celebrations of the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party. So there will be a lot of internal criticism on Xi Jinping if there are reverses, successful reverses on the border, if India retaliates on this, then, or if Taiwan retaliates, or if Vietnam or Philippines retaliates, or Japan retaliates, or the Biden administration retaliates. We do not know how it will pan out, but this is a crucial year for the Chinese in terms of the face value. China has this problem of face, and everything has to be smooth during these celebrations, and international relations are not so smooth. So this could be a problematic in this year's 100th anniversary celebration of the Communist Party. So we do not know how it will. Maybe China climbs down. Maybe China agrees to something in this 9th Corps Commander meeting. We do not know. Can China escalate on the border? Quite possible. That is also quite possible. But what if India retaliates with higher casualties on the Chinese side? That is unpalatable to China, because we can only have some escalation between India and China, not full escalation, because both are nuclear countries as well. So that is going to be a major problematic for these two countries.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Shall we wind up it, sir? No more questions, it seems to be. Many thanks for giving an excellent lecture and engagement. India-China relations are located in a larger historical context. Professor Kondapalli Ji provided us with detailed analysis of important issues such as territorial issues, agreement between India and China, policy towards Pakistan, China-Pakistan axis, policies of various countries towards Tibet, trade relations, water politics, technological issues, and so on. Today, we had privilege of having detailed understanding of India's response to Chinese aggressive tactics. Many thanks for responding to our questions. Thanks again for enriching evening. Thank you all, and thank you all the participants who has given full support in going the session very enriching and intellectually. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again. Thank you all.
Namaskaram.
Namaste. Namaste.